This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
My response to the chaos of the world is order and discipline. I have to write every single day. I have to do a cold shower every day. I have to not eat sugar every single day. In my small way, I've imposed some order, and that's an essential part of my process.
All right, Stevie. No, I'm kidding. I had to straight out of the gate, right? So here, folks, here's the deal. My guest today, I'm not surprised by your answer, but our prep was short, and I'm okay with that. I think the best way to properly show my love for your work is, if you don't mind, can I just start by sharing something that I stumbled into that you wrote? You cool with us going there to start?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
Okay. So here we roll. The secret is obvious. We don't finish things because to finish is to invite judgment. While the unfinished thing is still in its genesis, we have the hope that it can be altered. If it is not loved now, it can be loved later, once it is changed. And as we may not be loved now, we can be loved later once we are repaired, when we are reshaped in a subsequent draft. If we surrender to this hallucination, we become the lotus eater, forever in the opiated dream of a better future. So that is the secret, to accept the judgment of ourselves and our work, to pronounce ourselves already at our destination and understand that it is only the brave revelation of our current iteration we discover our authentic nature, sacred and profane, flawed and perfect. Your script, novel, play, painting is finished. Send it where it needs to go. So first of all, I absolutely needed that. Right? I love it. Why does it land? Will it land with everybody? I don't know. I know it lands with me. So thank you for that. And Stephen, in some ways, everything that I've been able to stumble in on you has been true to that, has been true to this idea. As we don't know, you don't know, like, go do the thing, go write the thing, go explore the thing, and the thing might take on a different vessel. So one, thank you for giving me a little bit of time while you're still here in the States before you head over to the pond, which we'll get to. Two, if you were going to write the story of your life for public consumption, what vessel are you choosing to tell that story? Are we going book, movie, music video, poem? Let's start there.
Wow. So much to think about in that regard. I pop between medium because none of them are wholly satisfied. I was a cinematographer for a long time, and I love cinematography and painting because of its enigmatic way of encoding our experience of the world, and that you see an image in a movie, someone looking into space, looking into a morning sunlight, immobile, inarticulate, stationary, and we feel something. There is a emotive connection. We don't easily quantify it, but we look at a Rothko painting, we look at an impressionist, we look at a postmodernist, it makes us feel something and we can't quantify it. So I love that method of expression because I think it's more honest. I don't think we always fully understand or cognify what's we're experiencing. We can't always articulate it. Sometimes it has to be enigmatic and uncertain. And so in some sense, I want to stay in film because I love that uncertainty of ideas. I think that does more truthfully go into the core of my experience of the world and how I mediate it. But then you mentioned poetry. I love poetry because it's a distillation of an idea. And I think, Hitchcock once said that a film is like life with all the boring parts cut out. And I think that poetry is a little bit like that. And that, Ezra Pound, who, despite the fact he subsequently became a kind of terrible fascist and was imprisoned, had much of value to say to Hemingway and T.S. Eliot and others about how less is more, and haiku is the ideal form of poetry. And if we try to reduce an idea to its fundamental element. There's something of value in that as our own process to discover what is the fundamental nature of things. But also, again, it goes to this enigmatic nature of expression. When you say less, you imply more. The more you speak, the less you mean. So we have a term we use in film all the time called exposition. And a lot of young writers are inclined to use lots of exposition to explain everything because they think the audiences have to understand everything. I think you want the audience to be confused a lot of the times because that replicates their experience of the world. And then later, you can have a clarity that could be acquired over time. But don't start with clarity. I get there. For me, the ideal form is a hybrid. The novel that I just wrote is a combination of kind of poetry. It got a lot of cinematic elements in it, and that it's enigmatic in its expression. And what it allowed me to do was to drill down into the nature of my characters, but really my own nature, and then say, okay, let's look at aberrant behavior. And I've done lots of aberrant behavior. I've had lots of catastrophes. I've made lots of mistakes in my life. Why did I behave that way? Not that I could ever really discover it. I got an idea about the nature of narrative. I think all narrative is fake. I think the whole idea that everyone says that we're storytellers is a nonsense. I think narrative is something that we impose on our lives to make it seem ordered because we can't ostensibly see the order. Everything is chaos. So I think that my novel ultimately was fragmentary. I looked at little individual experiences, elements, and moments of consciousness, and then tried to create a cumulative understanding of my life at this moment through the exploration of these characters. So I think right now it would be a novel, but if you ask me the same question next week, it could be a photograph or a painting or a poem. I think all of us have an obligation to be artists because that's about the discovery of self. And as artists, we all have to experiment with form because we're looking ultimately for the key to our own interior consciousness.
I mean, we're going to need more than an hour for this conversation if this is the path we're going down. But in the spirit of like keeping us going forward, if I forced you at this moment to like, you're now watching your life story, which is what I'm kind of also picking up, like to make sense of this, right, of this journey, what's the title you're giving you as the protagonist? If we're watching with you, and by the way, do you see first film or do you see first it's a book? I'm still curious. Are we sitting in a movie theater with you? And what's it called? What's the title?
Well, it's a disaster movie for sure. Look, the debate I have with others around me is always between these two things. And you alluded to this right at the beginning of this podcast about risk-taking. And I believe profoundly in taking risks because of the uncertain outcome. Yes, it could ostensibly be said that's a courageous thing to do. It's also a mad and dangerous thing to do. You're very responsible for a family, for others, for people that you love, and you take risks, you're putting them in harm's way. And tragically, I have done that throughout my life. I rationalize it with the narrative that I impose on my life that I'm doing it for a good reason. I'll always explain the dangerous things that I'm doing. When I was doing music videos and staying up late and doing things I shouldn't have been doing, I acquired lots of valuable experiences. Now when I impose the narrative on that, I can say, look, the experiments I did in music videos 30 years ago have informed every other type of art I've been involved in since. And that's why I was experimenting. I'm not sure if that's what I was actually thinking at the time. I was just thinking at the time, hey, this is fun. Let's do something dangerous. Let's see just what happens. So I guess it's a film more than anything else because it's kind of a structuralist independent film, probably French film from like 1968, where you're not quite sure what it's about, but the characters are all really interesting and are always on the verge of self-destruction, but triumph in some odd existential way at the end. I guess that's what my life.
It's funny. I was going to say, let's just call it "Let's See What Happens," and it's an existential film. And maybe we wasn't the best edit job in the world, right? But it's like, let's see what happens, and like here we go. I'm curious. I think I read you're a Buffalo guy. Are you an Orchard Park guy or a Buffalo guy, or what? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I was born in Amherst, suburb of Buffalo, and Orchard Park is dear and dear to my heart because my beloved Buffalo Bills play there. Talk about the imposition of order on chaos. So yes, that is, and maybe that's why I have such a philosophic nature, watching that team lose for so long and now triumphant. But yes, I grew up there. And then early in my life, went to the UK and studied there. My first gig was at the BBC, and talk about order and structure. It was all about order and structure. And there was one way to do, and a very good way, but one way to do art, one way to write, one way to direct, and then music videos, and the rest took off from there. Yeah.
I imagine it's not a traditional path from Orchard Park or Buffalo to the UK. Like how and why, and were you just curious about the adventure, or how did we get there?
Dad was an Anglophile, very literate, with a lot of books in our home, with an English bent, introduced to important Graham Greene and important British writers early on, and loved the place, and then went and then found an ability to work there. My writing ability, if I have an ability, was recognized early on. That's how I got recruited, and then got derailed when music videos started and had access to cameras and said, oh, hey, let's do the original plan of music videos, by the way, was just to put people in front of a white sheet, have them play their music and then give it to A&R men because they couldn't get into the record companies. And then somebody said, hey, why don't we put little stories around it, and why don't we put more money into it? And then flash forward 2 years later, and £1.5 million being spent on a Duran video. So it was crazy days. But no, none of my paths have been straight or certain. And it goes to my nature of uncertainty as to who I am and what I should be doing. I think there's a restlessness, and again, we can pose the narrative and say, oh, that's a virtue. He's restless. But it's more to do with a different type of fear, that I'm investing in the wrong thing, and that when I was doing music videos, I was thinking, well, maybe I should be doing commercials. And then when I was doing commercials, I was thinking maybe I should be doing features. And then when I was doing features, I'm thinking, okay, now I've done Corky Romano, White Chicks, Waterboy, and Half Baked. Maybe I should be doing something more substantive. So I'll go back and do an important independent like Monster. And then I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should direct. So does that mean that I'm iconoclast and radical and I've got a view and a path forward? No, it's just either compulsive or fear-based and thinking, I'm spending so much time doing this, maybe I should be doing something else.
I like the concept of, I like how wide you are. I appreciate how wide you are. And I think the way my deranged brain works, I've chosen to use courageousness as a platform to allow me to stay wide. So that's sort of my sanity metric, because I'm like, okay, now I can play in all these places. I don't want to be typecast as one thing. Sometimes it is a courageous story. It's almost always a courageous story, but like a courageous venture, or it's courageous leadership, or it's a courageous conversation, or it's a courageous idea, and I make sense of it because it's all living under the concept of courageousness. And there is no, I don't think there is a story worth paying attention to if courage isn't involved in it. I'm curious if you feel differently of that.
I think you're exactly right. The thing I have to constantly navigate is the difference between recklessness and courageousness. And for me, in my narrative, I think it's to do with courageousness because I'm putting myself at risk, but I'm also putting other people at risk. So when you do a film, you raise money for a movie and you've got to pitch your project. Now, first of all, you're a writer and artist. So now you're speaking to money people about the project's virtues, and you're asking them to give you invariably millions of dollars to support your film. And they ask you, is this definitely going to make money? I don't know. I think so. And that unfortunately becomes part of the sales pitch. Oh, you're so honest, Stephen. You said, well, I might not make money. I'll give you millions of dollars. Okay, now you're carrying this burden of someone else's money, which you're inevitably doing. Now you've got actors. You go to actors. And I did a little film called Decoding Annie Parker. And I approached Helen Hunt, and she read the script and loved it. But her time is valuable. Her brand is valuable. Now she's going to be working on an independent film that maybe nobody will see. So now I'm carrying that burden. And Samantha Morton, Oscar nominee, and Samantha was fantastic. But again, flew all the way over from England to work on the project. And at risk, Corey Stahl, Aaron Paul, all these people joined this very small independent film. And then the day before the first day of photography, I was certain that I knew nothing about directing, nothing about actors, nothing about writing, and I had misled everyone. And the project was going to be a spectacular failure, and I would hurt all these people's careers, and everyone who invested in the film would lose money. Now, was I courageous? And by the way, it took me 7 years to put that project together, in charging forward relentlessly, stopping all other work, going to the brink of bankruptcy, by the way. I sold everything I had to get that film made. And then the day before photography was sure that it was a terrible project and no one would ever see it. Courageous or reckless, I don't know. But it was a life force. When, Viktor Frankl, I think, wrote one of the most important books of the 20th century, in Man's Search for Meaning. And if you have a purpose and the purpose can be an individual project, and you put everything into that, and you risk everything, then, to my mind, you're fully living life. If others are dependent on you, with that courageousness comes a certain amount of recklessness. And so the moral reckoning of those two things together is a very hard one for me. In the end, Decoding made a lot of money and it was successful and won lots of rewards, but damn, was I terrified.
My mentor would say, he always used to say, there's a difference between risk and risky. There's a big difference between those two. There's space between those two. And, I imagine we're similar. I'm an observationalist. I study. I love people. I love studying. Well, they said this, but it meant that, right? And all the things. And you probably don't know this and you're a busy man, but so my first book was called Return on Courage, and my first 6 months was looking at the dictionary definition of courage, and it just didn't sit with me well. It was the ability to do something that frightens one. And I'm like, I don't see who wants to do this? And where's the utility in that definition? Now add on the layer of corporations. Who wants to do that at work? And so my first 6 months was could I come up with a better definition of courage? And where we landed was knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
Right.
And you're never going to have 100% of the knowledge you need to make a call, which is why you need faith, right? You got to have belief. And then how often have you known something and you felt it and you're like, there's no leap, there's no action. And so the way I look at recklessness personally is, faith and action without knowledge is a reckless move. But you have knowledge. You had the knowledge. You do know. Maybe you're never going to have 100% of it, because if you wait, you're going to get passed, or someone's going to make a movie or on that topic. And knowledge and faith without action is paralysis, and knowledge and action without faith, if you're numb on the inside, you're working on safe. That's not a great story either. So I would say there was lots of risk, personal risk, professional risk, other people at stake as well that came along with you. But the power of the gut, when the gut knows, even if words don't make sense of it. And I think that's my next question. I'm curious, do you have a love-hate relationship with words, or do you love words?
Well, something so very important was the word faith to me, which is hugely important, because I think faith is how we sustain ourselves. And again, faith can be a myth. We don't know. That's the whole nature of faith, is there's no evidentiary support that what we believe in exists. So that's why it's faith, and that's why it's so important. And the nexus between faith and doubt is an important thing, because we go between the two. So when we have faith, which can't be sustained because it can't be verified, so we just have to believe in it. That's the nature of faith. We can carry on because we know that in our hearts, without evidence, that we're going to succeed. But then, of course, as Thomas Aquinas and others teaches us, the significance of doubt is also very, very important, because we discover that in doubt, when we look for evidence and it's not there, we have no choice but to rely on faith. Otherwise, we can't sustain ourselves. So remind me of your question. I'll go to your.
It's beautiful. But no, when you spar with concepts and you spar with words, there's been parts of me in thinking about how I wanted to, sometimes you want to give the audience, paint a picture of your guests. I'm like, and you've done so much. And I'm like, wow, in some ways you're a maker. You're a maker. That's from my lens. I'm trying to make sense of you in a short period of time. And then I was like, well, he's also a creator and he's a cinematographer. And there's a lot of things that you are. And so I started thinking about the power of words, and someone who's been sparring with words as long as you have, and bending words and putting certain words together. Is it a love story for you, your relationship with words? Or is it also sometimes when I can't find the right combination? What's your take on words?
I love language, and I love words. I would generalize that to language, because I think we're always encoding ideas through some form of language. It could be a visual language. It can be composition. I can create an asymmetrical composition of frame, put someone way on the edge of the frame, looking away from the more open area. And the audience will look at that and say, oh, that person's at risk just by that composition. I can select a color in a film set and make an audience feel something. In an editing room, I can use the staccato style of editing, which is a language. It's just a different type of language, different type of encoding, and create a feeling in the audience through that staccato editing. Or I can hold a shot for a very long time where the audience wants a cut to come and doesn't, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. So for me, this idea of encoding concepts is something very important to me because I'm still searching for meaning. I'm not sure what my life means. I'm not sure what my purpose is. I'm not sure what anything ultimately is, of what the value of anything ultimately is, and what its value is in my life, what I should be focusing on. But I find specifically in written or spoken language a great beauty. And I love creating constructs that creates a emotive response in the listener or the viewer. For my own purpose, I'm a great believer in Joan Didion in that I write to discover what I think. And I don't know what I think until I'm writing. So for me to write, to dictate, I try to eliminate now all the physical impediments to direct and open expression. So I've stopped using the computer and I will only dictate. And I will do it without form, without structure, without an outline. To outline something to my mind is to limit what you're going to ultimately discover. So I will begin talking early in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, speak for 3 hours, make a point of not taking a break, all dictated. And then I'll print it out and look at it and discover things that I never knew that I thought. It's like a strange channeling. I can't formulate ideas. I can't understand things until I articulate them. So to me, to your question, language is sacred and essential, and it's all about love. Now, when I was writing to outlines and to structure and to order, when I believed in an orthodoxy, when I was terrified about the rules, about what a good screenplay would be, and there's so many books written about how you're supposed to write a screenplay based on, supposedly on Aristotle. How strange, of all the art forms, only in film are we still using a 2,000-year-old model, whereas all the other art forms we've evolved. But anyway, because there's so much money involved, and because the industry is so fear-based, every middle-level executive is terrified of risk. So they will make a point of never hiring anybody who's an iconoclast, never hire anybody who's not experienced, and never hire anybody that prevents them from saying to their seniors, well, okay, the film failed, and it was a film that I was in charge of, but would you have made any choices different from mine? So I hired all the people you would have hired, I purchased the script you would have purchased, and I made the film the way you would have made and failed. And they're safe, but they're safe by not taking risks. So that's the world in which I existed and I inhabit. But when I stopped thinking the way they thought and just used a free form of expression, then I found it altered my life and I could access things within me that I didn't know were there.
To me, that feels like part of the whole human experiment, though, right? It's like one of my favorite quotes is, it takes you 40 years to figure out who you are and the next 40 to be that person. Beautiful. And, that really, by the way, I'm writing my book at around 38, 39 when I'm like, oh, great. Okay, thank you, universe, for this reminder. But the Joan Didion quote lands. Like, I forget, one of my favorite quotes is, I write so I can think what I know. And I feel almost embarrassed that I don't remember who actually said that. But the Didion quote, right, was, I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear. I don't know what I think until I write it down. To me, it's like total detective work. It's a constant living and auditing and living and auditing and living and auditing and going back and forth between the two and trying to make sense of all of this. When you think about your writing or your stories, or do you have another word that you would use? Is it IP? Does that take away? I mean, what you should see his face. This is kind of why I went there, right? Like, how do you had a visceral negative reaction to that thought. Like, what do you call it? Are they just stories? Is it just experiments?
I think I've spoken recently, again, from my writing, about the dialectic is actually between narrative and consciousness. And that narrative is our imposition on the world, whereas consciousness is our actual experience of the world. So if we think of the Proustian way of looking at things, we remember things, we imagine things, and we experience them in the moment. And in our consciousness, we're always jumping between the three. As you and I are speaking, you're thinking about past conversations, people we'd know, and I'm thinking about the next thing I want to say. I'm thinking about my imagination, what I wish the world to be. I'm thinking about my relationships, how they could be better or worse. And I'm thinking about this moment, you and I engaged in important conversation. And that, I think, is a more natural representation of the way people mediate the world. So when we're creating things, that's the way we should create them. Our characters should be living in the past. We should flash back. We should see their imagination, see a product of what they imagine, and then be in the present. That isn't a traditional film structure, but it actually goes to human nature. And if we're making films for other humans so that they can understand they're not alone, that's one of the things that artists do, is tell people they're not alone, then that's the way we should be writing. And I think also there's a term that I like to use, which is the momentum of the mediocrity, which is something that you were talking about before, that once we've done something, we feel safe in that. There's a certitude to it. We're in a relationship for a long time, which may be a failed relationship. We're at a job that may be a job that we no longer find satisfying. We may be halfway through a script that is actually terrible. In all those cases, the momentum carries us forward because we would rather do what we're certain of and what we are very experienced than to take the great and courageous risk on doing the things that we haven't done before. We don't leave the relationship, we don't quit the job, and we don't abandon the script. And that, I think, is the tragedy of virtually every life that I know.
So when you think about your life and you think about your projects or something, is there a project that you haven't gotten to yet that you know you need to get to, that you're working your way towards?
I've got a one-man show that I'm doing, which is, and so much of what you and I are talking about, Ryan, which is Steve Bernstein is all his different iterations. And you said before about the idea of IP, and people are referring to this as an IP because it relates to my new film, which is GRQ. It's the making of the film, which is a one-man show. It's also, we got a blockchain company that wants to do a treasure hunt around the film. And then I've got the book GRQ, which is tied to the film. So that would all suggest IP. The reason I responded viscerally to that is the problem I have in Hollywood is the relationship between art and commerce. And that we sell things here. We have to earn money. We have to live. And so everything becomes an IP. But in addition to being IP, it's also the product of our imaginations, individual and collective. The writing is a sacred thing to me because it's about self-discovery. So I want to think, and this could be my narrative, which I'm imposing again, that it's all about the art and using my art to discover about myself and therefore share the discovery about my own nature to say to others, this could be your nature as well. And that is either sacred or profane, but it's something that I think that we should all be doing. If I think of what I do as a product, then I think differently because I'm thinking about how it could be sold to others, how it could be packaged, how it could be marketed. I call it drive-by seduction, how we can seduce large groups of people to give money to invest in my project. So for all those reasons, I think slightly differently about these issues, and I would prefer to think about it as an art rather than an IP. But did I go off trail, as I often do, off track from your question?
No, not at all. I mean, I think it's about protecting what you value, right? And and staying disciplined and honoring that, which in some ways is a system, right? And I think you've also talked about where systems help us and where systems don't. And I'm curious to get your take. Can you share a little bit of hey, this is a place where system and structure do have a place, and here are other places where it doesn't?
I think you have to finish the system and structure. I don't think you just have to start that way. I think that we want to think that the order of the world is ostensible. I don't think it is. I think it has to be discovered. It has to be discovered through hard labor, and it has to be discovered through courage in that and a faith in the uncertainty. There's an expression I often use, which is embrace the chaos. You don't know what the world's about, but go out and live your life fully. Start that book, start that screenplay, do what you've got to do, and you will discover a shape or a form. Now, I don't think it ever is fully manifest. If there is a divine hand that has structured our world, it's never going to be fully manifest to us. But little bits of structure and order can be manifest to us. And those things can make sense and give us purpose. So in screenwriting, I begin in disorder and chaos. The first draft of a screenplay will be 200 pages of crap, nonsense, terrible, dictated. I write a screenplay usually in 2 days. I write a novel in 3 days, but it's terrible. Anybody can write. We all write emails, but writing well, it's a different thing. But then I go back, using the Joan Didion principle, read what I wrote, and I discover order and structure within those things. And then I extract an order and structured and disciplined screenplay from those ruminations that have to begin in chaos, but finish in order.
What's that? What is that time period between vomit it out, look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. The vomiting is 3 days, and then the first rewrite is probably another month, and then another month for the polish. So about 2.5 months to get a screenplay out. So it's still very quick by most people's standards, only because I eliminate writer's block. I advise other people about how to get around writer's block by using this method. If you don't have to write to a standard, and if you don't have to write to a form, then there's no writer's block. You just write. And then once you get down on paper, the rewriting almost never engenders writer's block. It's easy. So that's why I write in that way. And 2.5 months is quick for a screenplay. It's quick for a novel. And yet I don't want to use the term cranking out because it makes me sound mechanized, but I'm cranking them out. There were 4 screenplays last year, 2 novels last year, a textbook last year, not because I'm a genius, but because I found this methodology, which is stop trying to find the absolute truth and discover your own truth.
Beautiful. I want to, it's like, I'm almost annoyed at myself because that's a very powerful idea that you just shared, that it's all about discovery and just continue to play and and then audit the stories later. But I'm also fascinated by process. I do like process. I think process helps us I'm at peace staying in the journey. One of the things I've been doing for myself, so I'm just south of you, I'm in San Diego, is I have found myself, I'm honoring my Pisces, I'm a March baby, by starting my day 4 or 5 days a week. I'm in the pool now doing laps. And I absolutely can't help but think about the metaphor of I want to be done with the 25 laps, but I will drown if I'm not just thinking about the lap right in front of me, even the stroke just in front of me.
Brilliant.
And that's right. There is no destination if I don't get through this stroke. And so I've tried to find ways to just smile, which is a weird visual when you're in the pool, as I'm doing a lap in the moment, in the lap, being like, I want to just enjoy this moment that I get to do this. And I've got all my tricks to get through it. So forgive me if I ask you about the way you go about your laps.
We're brothers. And this is Stoicism, which is hugely important to me. The idea that we can't control the world, but we can control ourselves. So I keep talking about the chaos of experience, and I believe the world is chaotic, and we impose narrative and order, and there's no obvious order. We borrow order, we mechanize our desire for it, and we see order where there isn't one so that we can survive. We see the world as causal. We see it as safe. If virtue is rewarded, then we can be virtuous. All we have to be is virtuous. We'll be rewarded. Everything's fine. The world doesn't work that way, but we want it to. But we can control our own selves. And one of the ways to control ourselves is discipline. Every morning I'm up at 5 a.m. and I'm writing. Every day. If I'm up at 5, the sense of self-disgust is profound. So I don't know if I'm going to be writing well, or I can't, as I say, we don't know what I'm going to be writing, but I know that my day has an order. Self-discipline is the one thing that I can find order in. And then for me, I also exercise ravenously, but it's the cold shower. I do a 10-minute ice cold shower. Now, when you first start the shower, and
Is this reckless? Is this reckless or courageous?
When you're first doing it, you're counting. You're saying, I got to count to 600 and I'll get there. So I start counting. And then I did that for a few months, and you start getting bored with that. And you say, I'll just intuit it. And then I would intuit it, and I looked at the watch afterwards, and it was half the time that I thought I was there. Then I would sing a song. But the interesting thing is, once I began it, I couldn't stop doing it, because once you start a streak, you feel an obligation to keep it going. So my response to the chaos of the world is order and discipline. My response to the chaos that I experience within myself is order and discipline. I have to write every single day. I have to do a cold shower every day. I have to not eat sugar every single day. I have to study the books that I read or the language that I'm trying to learn every single day. Not because I know those things are of value, because I don't. The research on cold showers, I'm not sure whether it's been verified, but I can't stop myself from doing it. Getting up early in the morning to write, a lot of times I just want to lie in. But at least in my small way, I've imposed some order on the structuralness of everything else. And that's an essential part of my process, is that this idea of momentum, I think, is very important. I mentioned the momentum of mediocrity, which most people fall into. We keep we have habituations which aren't always positive or good simply because they're habituations and they keep making us do those things over and over again. I can't help but do the cold shower. But by the same token, if I was in an unsuccessful relationship, I'm not fortunately, but if I once had someone who I hired, an agent who was terrible. I didn't fire them because I didn't want to pick up the phone and have that call where they cried when I fired them. So many people live lives like that. I've altered that slightly in that I'm saying my habituations have to be positive habituations that to do with my individual benefit. And it gives me a sense of order even when it isn't anywhere else obvious to me.
I mean, one of my takeaways from this podcast today, and it's not a new concept for me, but I'm curious to get your take, is that leadership starts with self-leadership. And we forget that it starts with self-leadership. And what is your regiment? What is your process to make sense of it all, to keep yourself, to short circuit mediocrity? To me, that's where I love process, or I love swimming. It's like I don't know if it was a TED talk, start your day by making your bed. Okay, you've got your first win of the day. You got yourself, you're in the win column. Now what? Where do you go from there? So this is a two-parter because I'm fascinated by, I feel like I still have a screenplay to tell or show. I'm sure that's whatever the right language is. I know what journey I'm on now, but I know that there will be a time where I will make that a priority. So I'm still very curious about, after we're out of the 3 or 4 days of getting it out and the way you take 2.5 months of auditing your work, what are you doing? Do you have a whiteboard? Are you writing concepts out? What does that interaction look like?
The thing I first focus on usually is dialogue. I just have characters speak. Everyone knows about story because there's so much focus on story in both the novel and in screenwriting, that people know the orthodoxy, know the 3 acts, know the inciting incident, all that sort of thing. When I speak to students who are studying with me or are mentoring, they can always tell me the story. Then when I ask them about their characters, they can maybe speak for about a minute. And then what I point out is that the reason people are attracted to art is they want to discover about human nature. And human nature is hidden within the mystery and the complexity of character. So spend less time on story and much more time about character. So my first draft, the vomit draft and the subsequent ones, is always about backstory, creating a detailed history of these characters. Not that's necessarily precise and prescriptive, we have this trauma and therefore they behave this way later, but just so that I understand the full complexity of the character, because our experience of people is that they are complex, not simple. When you write a story, all your characters become very simple because they're simply serving the narrative. They say something because it's taking you to an individual place, and then the characters become unrecognizable from our human experience. We're used to people full of inconsistencies and contradictory notions within their head. So the first thing I do is focus on this development of character. And then when the characters are fully developed, I know their backstory, and the backstories go on for a very, very long, pages upon pages. When I worked with John Malkovich on a film and I gave John his backstory, it was 200 pages of imagined backstory for him to draw on. And he added another 100 pages to that, none of which ever appeared in the film or the script. But we use that to evolve the character. And I use the backstory to evolve my characters in my books or in my films. Then I start thinking, okay, well, if I have these characters and they behave in this way and they're together and they're interacting, what might happen between them? And then the story begins to evolve. But if you don't make story follow character, you'll produce the same sort of stuff that every film produces. It'll be predictable, it'll be generic, and it will be uninteresting to most audiences. They did a test some years ago where they brought audiences into a film and they showed only 10 minutes of the movie. And they asked the audiences how the film ended. 90% of the audiences knew how the film ended after 10 minutes because all films follow that same structure. So for me, when I develop characters full of inconsistencies, they'll go off in tangential asides. They'll talk about things beyond the narrative. They'll live and breathe and present as humans, and we're interested in humans. That's why AI will never replace writers, because people want to know what humans think, not what AI thinks, even though it's maybe a hybrid of a great many different minds. And then as I do the narrative, I start looking for new ways to approach the narrative. It doesn't have to be in a standard form. It doesn't have to be in 3 acts. It has to be something that engages in audiences. Remember, the distinction I made between consciousness and narrative engages consciousness. So it might have to do with some flashbacks to a memory. It might have to be to do with imagination, in which case some of the images presented from like an unreliable narrator may be real and may not. The audience may be uncertain about it. And then the experiential, what's happening in the moment. So you'll have a sense of forward progress. There'll be events, there'll be obstacles they have to overcome, but always based on the complexity of character, and then ultimately even the complexity of consciousness. So the film works at a different level than a film typically would. And that's my process.
Love it. And thank you for sharing. I could see, I'm still curious of, all right, now you're auditing your own first vomit draft. Are you using like color coding highlighters for backstory versus how do you go about tracking what's a backstory and what's a story?
Yeah, I do whiteboards, absolutely. I lay things out so I could see where they're going. I do arcs. I think ultimately 2 big questions about film. The first is, how do you start? And to my mind, it should always be a mystery. All films, comedies, action, all a mystery. It's the mystery of the human condition that you don't know how a person is going to behave, and we'll discover that when they're presented with crises or obstacles. So I'll put an arc for each character where they are and where they finish. Going back to the Hitchcock quote that it's life with all the boring parts taken out, I think all films are about change. So I want to know how each of my characters is going to change. And I make sure that not only do all my major characters change, but all of my minor characters change as well. So I'll do a diagram for each of them of what their arc will be. And then I also do an arc for the story, where it's going to be and where it's going to end. Usually there's some acceleration or an increase, what we call increasing of stakes. So the obstacles become bigger. Why do I want to increase obstacles? Because I want to put my characters and all their complexities in the crucible of experience. So as things become more difficult, how now knowing these characters' backstories, will they change or be altered? So I'll have an arc for those things as well. And once I have the arcs and I know where things are going to go, and these arcs cross and interact with each other, the writing itself becomes very, very simple. I know my characters. I know what the obstacles are. I know how they're going to change. And ultimately, I know how I'm going to get them there.
Is there a number of characters that always sort of seems like, okay, too many characters, not enough characters? Do you find yourself, whether it's after you audit it, not going in, that you're like, wow, or just whatever the story needs?
Great question. And it goes to the laziness of writers and of thinkers, in that we prefer simplicity to complexity, and we prefer easy answers to complex answers. If you want to know the secret of writing a great screenplay, add more characters. But writers hate it because it's so much more difficult. When you have 2 people speaking, one person speaks, one person responds, it's simple. You put a third and a fourth person in the room, so much more difficult, but so much more dynamic and interesting. And if you have 4 characters, make it 6. If you have 6, make it 8. And now you have these interactions, these asides, you have these dynamics going on that can be visible or can be spoken, text and subtext and backstory upon backstory. And now the audience is experiencing the way they experience the chaos of the world, but it's delightful because it's engaging them on so many different levels. But our laziness prevents us from doing that. Our momentum towards mediocrity wants us to keep things simple because we prefer simple to complex, because we only have so much energy. And going to my idea of investment, if we're going to invest some time, that some time may be a bad investment. Maybe we shouldn't be working on this script. Maybe our next script will be better. Maybe we shouldn't be working on this relationship. Maybe our next relationship should be better. So we don't want to invest too much, because we invest too much, we can lose too much. So we keep things simple, we crank the thing out, and we move on to the next script before our script that we spent years on becomes a disaster. Confederacy of Dunces, one of the best novels ever written, discovered after the guy was dead by his mother, put out to the world. 40 producers have tried to make the film. It's considered unmakeable, but it's an absolute, masterpiece. He spent his entire life writing that book. Was that the right book to write? Never enjoyed a moment of success in his life. Malcolm Lowry wrote Under the Volcano in a shed with a little lantern in his shed. He was a big drinker. Wrote 785 pages, I guess it was. And then to celebrate, got drunk the last night, knocked over the lantern and burnt up the entire book. And then woke up the next morning. Now, this is a big moment for you and I, Ryan. What did he do the next morning? He wrote page 1 over again and rewrote the entire book as best he could remember it. Now, for me, after spending years in that little shed, writing 700 pages, part of me would have just abandoned it and said, I've already invested too much, too dangerous to put everything into this. Maybe it's not a good book. I'll write a different book. But he rewrote the book and it was a masterpiece.
Forgive my laziness on just using this quick metaphor. Okay, so let's say we're in Act 3 of this podcast, right? So coming down the home stretch here, 48 minutes in. I probably shouldn't have waited 48 minutes in, but I just love
too much. My fault.
No. I think everything that's supposed to be in the story is in the story, and I've learned a ton already from you. So thank you for sharing. But if we braid together the few major concepts we've talked about, which is you, the human, when is it something dangerous or reckless versus courageous, how to tell a great story, leading with characters, getting your backstory right, staying on the journey, not walking yourself off the ledge, your process to going about storytelling. I write so I can think what I know. And now you've got GRQ. We're 100 days out since GRQ is out in the world. I'd love for you to, one, kind of tell us what you told them. Like, let's do it all with GRQ, like your process. Because to me, I see GRQ, like, it's not just a book. In your mind, did it start as a book? And then you're like, oh, well, let's make a movie. Like, what did you have in mind for this? But walk us through your process on getting GRQ. Like, how long did it take? How many characters? And also permission granted to give, the backstory on the story.
Well, I was fascinated by how morally compromised I am regularly through circumstances. And if you want to morally compromise yourself, try to raise money for a movie. Because now you're trying to convince people to invest in an uncertain outcome, to have faith in something that is your vision that, because of doubt, even you don't always have faith in. So I thought talking about a filmmaker, talking about raising money for a movie is too obvious. So what if I took a person in ordinary circumstances who had a different sort of dilemma in that his house is being repossessed? And the second thing I'm fascinated by is truth and line. You talked about leadership before. I talk a lot about leadership because it's hugely important to understanding film directing. And I think leadership begins in radical honesty, that if you ever lie to an actor, even to say, great take, now let's do another one, and they go, that wasn't sincere, that was a lie, they'll never believe anything else you say. So you can't even tell a small lie to a crew member, to an actor. You have to be radically honest. You have to show your own vulnerability. That's part of your honesty, is to talk about your weaknesses, talk about your imperfections, and then speak to them in an honest way, and they can discover the best part of themselves and know that they can trust you. So in all that, when I was selling the film, it was more difficult. And my character in this book is getting his house repossessed. So he has to raise money, like raising money for a film. And he tells a lie. He lies to his wife. So he doesn't do that radical honesty that I promote. He does the opposite. And now he's driven both by having to sustain a lie to his wife and to raise money to save his house in 7 hours. I've been in situations where I've had a day and a half to say a movie that was going down to raise $500,000. And I did it. And I stayed up for 48 hours and I achieved it. But it was and phone calls to everybody, begging, cajoling, charming. And that's what this character does. So I was fascinated by that and I was driven to it. I wrote it very, very quickly. And I did it as an experiment. I find it stultifying and difficult to write screenplays because they have an order. There's a software program called Final Draft that we use. It's very difficult to write in it naturally and organically. So I said, well, you know what? I'm just going to write this in free verse as a poem. So I wrote a 250-page free verse poem about a guy who lied to his wife, who was trying to save his house. And I looked at it and did the reread as I do. And I thought, hey, there's something interesting here. And I began tightening it and shortening it and distilling it and distilling it. And it became a short novel, which with all my short novels, I tend to throw away and make into a screenplay. And then began working on the screenplay, and my partner read it and said, this is the best thing you've ever written. Not the screenplay, but the short novel. I said, really? That awful free verse bit of nonsense? Best thing you've ever written. And I said, all right, I'll send it to my agent. And my agent said, best things you've ever written. And they gave it to a publisher who said right away, I want to publish this book. And the book got published. Now, while that was going on, the screenplay had taken off. And I got in a cast and we shot the film before the book was published. And then while the publisher was working with them, the publisher gave lots of great notes and wanted to think different and more compressed and less free verse. I thought I learned a lot by making the film. We were talking about expression before. My expression was in the filmmaking. As we were making the film, I was improvising with the actors and experimenting with the lighting. I thought of whole new ways to portray the character. So I went back and rewrote the book in a month, gave it to the publisher. They loved it and they published it. So the book modified the film modified the book. The book was meant to be a throwaway, and the book now has been won awards and selling really well and has all changed my life, frankly. And everyone keeps saying the best thing I've ever written. How I can make sense of all that, Ryan, I don't know, except to say probably because I didn't want the book to be great. It became the best thing I ever wrote because I was just writing with a separate purpose in mind to get all the ideas down, and I was going to write a screenplay later. If you don't invest in something, you're more inclined to take risks, to take radical approaches, to be iconoclastic, and discover a better version of yourself.
Beautiful. And it was just part of your process, and here we are, right?
Here we are.
And GRQ, get rich quick. Correct?
Get rich quick. GRQ. The book's called GRQ. The film's called Get Rich Quick. And it's emblematic, that phrase, of so many things, because most of the people that come out here to California, and you live in California, so you know, that could be an emblem they could have tattooed on their arm, which is going to get rich quick. They were the prettiest person or the most beautiful person or best looking person in their high school. They were in the marching band. They can sing, whatever it is. They think they come to California and they're going to get rich quick. And then the idea of getting rich becomes for them significant because their value is determined by how much money they're earning or how much status they're having, as opposed to simply the love of art, which is a sure way not to achieve success because you lack an integrity of your own vision. It's all about audience. When you're writing, I can tell you this, if you're thinking about audience more than about the integrity of your ideas, you will invariably fail. And yet, because when you're working for a studio, there's so much money involved, and because those middle-level executives want to play it safe, everybody keeps saying to you, think about audience, think about audience, think about audience. And as Rick Rubin says and others, the more you think about audience, the less you're likely to succeed.
I mean, there is some irony here. I'm going back to I write so I can think what I know. So like, let's agree that I'm writing right now and this component is messy, but all you heard was this is the best thing you've ever written. You kind of wrote it quickly, but you didn't. It's called Get Rich Quick. It's 30 years you've been doing. How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, for 40 years. Yeah, you're right.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. And like here we are. Like this is it that you never thought. You were just trying to get this on the way to the film, and here we are. It's pretty special that the title is what it is because it's 40 years of work.
Yeah, Get Rich Slow, I guess I should call it.
You know what I'm saying? It's like there's some truth to that.
You made a great point, by the way. I couldn't have. People said to me, I was trained as a director at BBC, and then I became a cinematographer for 30 years and went back to directing, although I did a lot of theater in between, and commercials, but still not doing features. And people said, why didn't you just stay as a director or stay as a writer? Because I wouldn't have succeeded then. The only advantage of being an older writer is I've got a whole lifetime to draw on. When I'm creating characters, I've known these characters. Everybody in the book is someone that I've known. All these charlatans, liars, conjurers, misrepresenters, con men, lovers, charmers, all these people I've known in different iterations. And had I not known them, I could not write about them with any profundity or resonance if I write with profundity and resonance. So it's worth living a life so we have something to draw on to discover an answer to the mystery of the chaos of our existence.
Quick share, and then I'm going to have you wrap us for the day on this. And I don't know if you see over here, if you can see, it says Courage Week. So although this is going to go next week, we are actually in what we call Courage Week, where it's like, hey, where's one place where you should be more courageous? Like, where do you need courage the most? Where's one fear you want to take on? But before I go there, I'm dating myself, but I'm going back to my 20s here. So I was in the room. It wasn't my campaign, but I came out of advertising. And I was in the room where Dos Equis had the most interesting man in the world. And they present this campaign, great campaign. And you can imagine already where this is going, what the next conversation went. They'd sold this idea, and Dos Equis wanted to come back with an easy on the eyes, probably 29-year-old, 30-year-old, and the creative team fought them, saying you cannot have someone who's that age, because they need to have, if you're going to be the most interesting man in the world, you had to have experienced life and have seen enough and done enough, all the things, which is how he got to, which we now know is the most interesting man in the world. And that was very different for beer, right? Like you could, usually it was like a Spud McKenzie or a dog or easy on the ice person that you could grate cheese on their abs, not like a 70-year-old man who's sort of like sitting back contemplating. So your theory on go live it, go experience it, go mess up. It's not a mess up. It's just part of the story is what it's all about. And then here we are, right? 40 years of living it. And people are, by the way, when you say your partner read it first, give me more clarity there. Is that like
my wife who reads everything
Okay.
that I write and is ruthless in her editing and her talk about radical honesty.
yeah, that's great.
That's the most courageous thing I have to do, is to say, here, would you read this? Because I know what's coming. But I have to say that genuinely, and people always say this about their wives, but this is genuinely the case. You know, Emma Freud also is married to a very famous writer, and she edits everything that he does. She goes over everything that I write and tells me what's good and what's bad. And it's brutal and it hurts and I don't want to hear it. But it makes me better because she knows my voice and she understands the material. So anyway, I interrupted. Carry on.
You can call her the 600-second cold shower. That's what you can call her, right? That came from me. That did not come from you. That came from me.
She'll hear this later. You may get a phone call from her later. Yeah,
that's fair enough. Don't give her my cell phone. All right, take us home. What do you want to leave the audience with?
Decide where you began, really, which is that quote that you gave of mine, which reads so much better than I remember writing it, but thank you for that, is that to do. There was another campaign, which is just do it. You remember that campaign? I think it was Nike, yeah, which is and surprisingly philosophic, because you don't know the outcome. You're never going to know the outcome. There's no certainty. The majority of people I know who have failed live in fear about things that will never happen. But they want to make sure that they've worked out in careful detail and with precise planning exactly what the outcome is going to be. And because outcomes are constantly variables, they keep planning and they plan forever and never do anything. At some point, and the point should be now, you have to say, I can't plan anymore. I can't prepare for catastrophic outcomes anymore. I can't make myself any more safe. In fact, I'm going to put myself in danger and charge forward and simply do it. And I will either succeed or I will fail. But even if I fail, going to what we were just talking about a moment ago, the lessons I will extract from that failure will make me a more complex and interesting person with greater insights about our shared human catastrophe. That's what we have to do. And if we don't do it, we can't fully live our lives. And our one moral obligation, first among all others, is to fully live our lives through experience, not through imagination.
Stephen Bernstein, folks, less think, more do. Get to it. Appreciate you. Good luck over there. Stay in touch. Stay courageous.
You're a special mind, Brian. Ryan, I wish I discovered you earlier. Now I'm going to go get your book. So I can find all those on your page, yeah?
You can, but do me a favor. Do not give it to your wife. I am not interested in her point of view. No, I'm kidding. I'm definitely kidding. Please pick it up. And I look, you can't talk about being in the courage business and not take the fear. So bring it on. Good luck over in the UK, whatever you're shooting over there or doing over there. And let's stay in touch. See you, Stephen. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.